Netflix is bringing us their German crime thriller series, Crooks. It's 8 episodes that features country-hopping schemes and lots of brutality. So let's grab the balaclavas and hit it. The theft of a valuable golden coin ends in catastrophe, and former safecracker Charly suddenly finds himself with Viennese driver Joseph on the most dangerous escape of their lives. Everyone wants the coin, and everyone wants revenge. A Berlin gang, a Viennese red light district kingpin, a Russian underground boss, and even the Corsican mafia. A wild road trip from Berlin to Vienna to Marseille begins, and to survive, the two unwilling accomplices must work together. Alright, so if you're looking for violence and backstabbing, this has those areas covered. The series follows Charly, an ex-con with a family who is approached by former associates that then threaten him into doing one last job. That plan goes to crap. Now Charly's on the run, teamed up with Joseph, an Austrian mob driver, and as they're pursued by several bad guys who are all searching for the item that Charly supposedly stole. Now there's a certain amount of rinse and repeat within this show. There's a lot of back and forth where characters continuously get into sketchy situations and have to do something to get themselves out, only to do it all over again. And while not all of this was bothersome, there did come the point when it was easy to tell what would happen next because the setups are typically built the same way. All the situations, they are different, but at the core, they're obvious. And when repeated every episode, they just become blah. The show starts out with an exciting action sequence, and then the main crux of the story involves a stolen coin. This is mainly vague, and it's also uninteresting, but it does serve as an appropriate MacGuffin to get everybody involved. Charly and Joseph are great as the unlikely dynamic duo. Now, Joseph is sweet and consistently underestimated, which is brilliant because he uses his size to decimate pretty much any attacker. I mean, you've heard of old man strength, right? Well, Joseph has big guy strength, and he is very powerful. I mean, he's a good guy who works for bad guys, but he's a good guy at heart. And he's unassuming, and he's quiet, but I found him both sympathetic and endearing, especially thanks to his mellow persona. And by the end, he was my favorite character. And there's one scene towards the very end of the final episode where he comes on strong, and the looks that he gets are hilarious. He's easy to root for, and it makes him one of the brightest spots in the show. And then in a slight contrast, Charly's a former bad guy who's now trying to be a good guy, but is forced into being a bad guy. Now, he's brooding a lot of the time, but he has an honorable portion to him with a genuine desire to really just stay out of trouble and keep his family safe. He's tough as well, and he's also easy to like, but for some reason, he almost always has this concerned or pained expression on his face, and that gives off a harsher vibe to his persona. Now, sometime in episode 2 or maybe 3, 2 cops named Nina and Robert are very quickly introduced without any reasoning. We just happen upon them sitting outside a bar like the story has been following them the entire time. And Nina is very ill-defined, being very aggressive and antagonistic in her drive for something, especially at the start when we meet her. She's awkwardly introduced, and then we're supposed to care about her quest, even though we don't know why. Now, once we're in episode 5, we can begin to understand her motivations through a focused exposition dump. And while those motivations, they do fit well within the narrative, this feels extra and unnecessary thanks to all the other complications that the characters are experiencing. I mean, she has influence in the story towards the latter portion, but she does come also across as a character who was introduced just so that she could be followed into a subsequent season. Now, I could talk about several other characters, but that would get boring since there are so many large ones that are introduced. But 2 that need to be spoken about are Red and Rio. They're meant to be menacing, but because of how inept and just utterly dumb they are, especially Rio, that tension is just lost. And just because they're stupid, that doesn't mean that they contribute any levity or humor. I mean, they're just simply mindless thugs who bumble their way through scenarios. And there are multiple moments where one or both of them are just shouting and screaming. I mean, sure, we can understand they're frustrated, but they're also like petulant children who use their outbursts as their main means of controlling a situation. Now, to the show's detriment, a bunch of moving parts overcomplicate the story and bring in angles that only seem to drag out the narrative. There are at least 4 different antagonists that complicate the plot, with another barely being shown or heard. And while this does keep the energy high, it also distracts and ends up causing the storyline to be weaker. I am impressed, though, at how the writers kept everything straight and separate, bringing the arcs together at the appropriate times. But even though it all becomes cohesive, it's not always better. Now, even though some of the characters are thinly developed for the amount of presence they're supposed to have, I still did become invested in the chase that's involving Charly and Joseph. Also, because Charly's family is involved and they're endearing, I was concerned for their outcome as well. Now, I do like that none of them are wilting flowers, but they're not superheroes either. They just don't make outright stupid decisions and actions. And because they are smart and clever, but not perfect, the story allows for some increasingly tense moments where the potential for bodily harm is very present. And speaking of bodily harm, this showcases some ferocious moments of violence. The main mode of carnage is through hand-to-hand fighting, with bare-knuckle punches being thrown that will knock teeth loose and then add all sorts of cuts to the face. But there have been some wonderfully brutal moments that showcase knife fights, as well as gun battles. And some of these don't show the blade entering the body or maybe a bullet hitting its mark. But in key moments, we do get to see how someone thinks. Or maybe rather what part of the body they use to create thoughts. Because what was inside is now become outside like that. Now, I think the gore, it's balanced and handled well, never needing to go overboard with what's shown, but also giving us enough to create some gasps. And the locations are captured well, too. We're shown seedy portions of Austria and Germany, which then contrast with the beautiful rural portions that are sparsely inhabited. We're also shown Marseille, where some of the city is affluent and other parts are just overridden with drugs and gangs. And these various locations, they help to keep the visual interest high while also creating destinations characters have to race towards. So at the end of this, Crooks delivers fast-paced action and ruthless violence, while also following a few captivating and flawed characters. The mystery and intrigue aren't as clever as the show believes they are, and the story is hampered by its inclusion of too many storylines that divert attention away from the most meaningful arcs. The repetitious plot complications also become tiresome from overuse, and the series as a whole is drawn out. But thankfully, the character conflicts provide the right amount of barbarity and well-crafted fight choreography to keep the intrigue and the entertainment flowing. There's sex, nudity, a bunch of profanity, and then a ton of savage violence. I give Crooks 3 out of 5 couches. So have you seen any good crime capers lately? Let me know what you watched in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.